Forbidden medicine, the shadow healers of the ancient world. If you wanted to speak to God in the ancient world, you went to the temple. You walked up the polished stone steps of Jerusalem, you purchased an unblemished lamb, and you handed it to a man wearing a breastplate of precious stones. The priests held the absolute monopoly on the divine. They controlled the blood, the altar, the smoke, and the incense. They were the official, state-sanctioned intermediaries between the heavens and the earth. But if your child was burning with a lethal fever in the middle of the night, if your wife was hemorrhaging on a wooden birthing stool, if a strange black infection was spreading across your arm, you didn't go to the temple, the priest couldn't help you. In fact, the law of Moses dictated that blood, sickness, and disease rendered a person ritually impure. If a priest touched a bleeding wound or a corpse, he was disqualified from his holy duties. The men in the shining robes were actually legally forbidden from touching the sick. So who did you go to? You slipped out the back door of your house. You walked past the official centers of power, down a narrow, unpaved alleyway, and you knocked on the door of an old woman. You went to the midwife. You went to the herbalist. You went to the women who operated in the absolute shadows of ancient society. Women whose fingers were permanently stained with the dark sap of crushed leaves. Women who knew the botanical secrets of the earth. Today, we are going to strip back the shining golden veneer of biblical miracles. We are going to look at the raw, gritty, fiercely guarded world of ancient pharmacology. We are going to reframe the legendary healings of the ancient world not as spontaneous bursts of magic, but as the sophisticated, highly effective, and often deeply forbidden medical expertise of women whose names were intentionally erased from the history books. I'm Holy Timelines. Today, forbidden medicine. To understand the underground economy of ancient medicine, we have to look at the ultimate black market transaction recorded in the book of Genesis. It is a story about fertility, desperation, and a highly psychoactive root. The patriarch Jacob is married to two sisters, Leah and Rachel. Leah is incredibly fertile. She is giving Jacob sons left and right. Rachel, the wife Jacob actually loves, is completely barren. In the ancient Near East, a barren woman was considered socially dead. She had no security, no future, and no value in the brutal patriarchal hierarchy. Rachel is absolutely desperate. The text says she goes to her husband weeping and screams, "Give me children, or I'll die." And Jacob, offering zero emotional support, yells back, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" The official theology of the day says that only God can open the womb. But Rachel isn't willing to wait on theology. She looks for medicine. One day, Leah's young son Reuben is out in the wheat harvest, and he finds a specific plant growing in the wild. He digs it up and brings it to his mother. The Hebrew text calls them dudaim. We know them as mandrakes. If you know anything about ancient botany, you know that the mandrake, Mandragora officinarum, is not just a pretty purple flower. It is a member of the nightshade family. Its thick, bifurcated roots famously grow in the shape of a human body, and ancient folklore claimed the plant would actually scream when pulled from the earth. But more importantly, the mandrake is a loaded chemical weapon. It is packed with powerful, incredibly dangerous tropane alkaloids, scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine. In the ancient world, the mandrake was the ultimate pharmaceutical multi-tool. If you boiled it correctly, it was a potent anesthetic used to knock patients out for primitive surgery. If you took too much, it caused violent hallucinations, a racing heart, and death. But if you prepared it in the exact right dosage, peeling the root and steeping it in wine, it was used to stimulate the female reproductive system and act as a powerful aphrodisiac. Rachel sees the boy carrying the roots. She knows exactly what they are. She knows the chemical power locked inside that dirty human-shaped tuber. She walks up to her sister Leah, her eyes locked on the plant. "Please," Rachel says, her voice tight with desperation, "give me some of your son's mandrakes." Leah looks at her. There is a decade of bitter, agonizing rivalry between these two women. Leah clutches the roots to her chest and snaps, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Rachel doesn't argue morality. She doesn't appeal to sisterhood. She negotiates a cold, hard pharmaceutical trade. "Listen to me," Rachel says, leaning in close. "You want Jacob? You can have him. He will sleep with you tonight, in your tent. Just give me the roots." Leah agrees. She sells a night with her husband for a handful of medicinal nightshade. And the text tells us that Rachel takes the plant, she prepares it, and shortly after, she conceives her first son, Joseph. The biblical narrative frames it as God finally listening to her prayers. But the gritty historical reality operating just beneath the surface of the text is that Rachel utilized the deep, sophisticated, botanical knowledge of her culture to artificially stimulate her own fertility. It wasn't a spontaneous miracle. It was an ancient prescription. But this kind of knowledge was incredibly dangerous to possess. To understand why the official religious establishment was terrified of these female healers, we have to look at the Greek word Pharmakeia. It is the word from which we get our modern word pharmacy. It means the administering of drugs, the mixing of potions, and the deep knowledge of herbs. But if you read the English translation of the Bible, you will almost never see the word pharmacy. Instead, whenever the word Pharmakeia appears in the original text, the male translators of the medieval and modern eras translated it as witchcraft. They translated it as sorcery. In the ancient mind, there was a razor-thin line between a miracle and a spell. If a male prophet of Yahweh healed a blind man, it was a divine miracle. But if a village woman mixed a poultice of crushed willow bark, which contains salicin, the active ingredient in aspirin, to stop a wound from rotting, it was dangerously close to sorcery. Women were not allowed to wield the power over life and death. That was God's domain, so the women who possessed the actual, chemical, life-saving knowledge of the natural world were pushed into the margins. They were labeled as witches. They were the whisperers in the dark. And nowhere is the power of these shadow healers more brilliantly displayed than in the opening chapter of the book of Exodus. The Israelites are slaves in Egypt. They are multiplying rapidly. The Pharaoh, the most powerful monarch on the face of the earth, is terrified of an uprising. He realizes that you don't need a massive army to commit genocide. You just need to control the point of entry into the world. You need to control the birthing room. He doesn't summon his generals. He summons the two head midwives of the Hebrew people. Their names are Shiphrah and Puah. Imagine this scene: the throne room of Egypt, massive granite columns, the heavy smell of exotic incense, armed guards holding golden spears, and standing in the center of the polished floor are two women whose hands are calloused and stained with the blood of childbirth. They hold no political office. They have no weapons. They just have knowledge. Pharaoh leans forward on his throne and issues a chilling, absolute decree. When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, he commands, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. He is ordering them to use their medical expertise to commit invisible, untraceable infanticide. A quick pinch of the umbilical cord. A hand slipped over the mouth. A deliberate failure to clear the airway. Who would know? Infant mortality was incredibly high in the ancient world anyway. It would just look like a tragedy. But Shiphrah and Puah do not flinch. They look at the god king of Egypt, and they walk out of the palace. And they completely, utterly ignore his command. They keep delivering the babies. They keep tying off the cords. They keep stopping the maternal hemorrhaging with ground herbs and applied pressure. Months go by. The slave population keeps exploding. Pharaoh is furious. He summons the midwives back to the throne room. Why have you done this? He screams, his voice echoing off the marble. Why have you let the boys live? I gave you a direct order. Now Shiphrah and Puah have to talk their way out of a death sentence. They cannot tell Pharaoh the truth, that they fear their god more than they fear his armies. So they use their specialized medical knowledge to craft the most brilliant, biologically plausible, and quietly insulting lie in ancient history. Shiphrah looks at Pharaoh, shaking her head with feigned professional frustration, and says, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous. They are like animals in the field. They give birth before the midwives even arrive. It is a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. They play right into Pharaoh's racist, aristocratic stereotypes. They are essentially telling him, your noble Egyptian queens are frail and delicate, and they need us to labor with them for hours. But these slave women, we can't even get our sandals on before the baby is already crying in the dirt. We simply cannot get there in time to kill them. Pharaoh, who knows absolutely nothing about the messy, visceral, agonizing reality of a birthing stool, accepts the medical excuse. The midwives walk out alive, and an entire generation of Hebrew boys is saved, including a little boy who will soon be placed in a pitch-covered basket on the Nile River, named Moses. The entire Exodus, the parting of the Red Sea, the Ten Commandments, the foundation of the Jewish faith and the Christian religion. All of it exists exclusively because two women in the shadows used their medical authority to outsmart an empire. But sometimes, the ancient medicine isn't hidden in the shadows. Sometimes, it is hidden in plain sight, masquerading as a purely divine miracle. Let us travel forward in time to the royal palace in Jerusalem. It is the 8th century BC. King Hezekiah, one of the greatest kings of Judah, is dying. He is not dying in battle. He is dying of a massive, localized infection. The text in 2 Kings and Isaiah chapter 38 describes it as a boil or a shetchen. In modern medical terms, this was likely a massive staphylococcal infection, a carbuncle, or perhaps even cutaneous anthrax. In a world before antibiotics, a deep skin infection that entered the bloodstream was a guaranteed, agonizing death sentence. A red streak traveling up your vein meant you had days, maybe hours, to live. The prophet Isaiah walks into the king's bedchamber. The room smells of sickness, necrotic tissue, and sweat. Hezekiah looks up, his face pale, burning with fever. Isaiah does not offer false hope. He stands at the foot of the bed and delivers the verdict. "This is what the Lord says," Isaiah declares. "Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover." Isaiah turns and leaves the room. Hezekiah is devastated. He turns his face to the stone wall, and he begins to weep bitterly. He begs God for more time. He reminds God of his loyalty, of his reforms, of the altars he smashed. Before Isaiah can even make it out to the middle courtyard of the palace, the voice of the Lord stops him. God tells Isaiah to turn around. God tells him to go back and give Hezekiah 15 more years of life. So Isaiah walks back into the infected bedchamber. He announces the good news. "The Lord has heard your prayer and seen your tears. He will heal you." Now, if this were just a story of spontaneous, magical healing, the narrative would end right there. The boil would vanish into thin air, the king would get out of bed, and everyone would sing a hymn. But that is not what happens. The healing requires a prescription. Isaiah turns to the king's royal attendants and issues a very specific botanical command. "Prepare a poultice of figs," he orders. The attendants rush to the kitchens. They take dried figs, they boil them down, they crush them into a thick, sticky, scalding paste. They bring it back to the bedchamber. "Apply it to the boil," Isaiah says. The servants take the hot, crushed fig paste, and they pack it directly onto the massive, infected wound on the king's skin. And the text says, they applied it to the boil, and he recovered. Why figs? Why didn't God just snap his fingers? Why did the prophet of the Lord suddenly turn into an apothecary? Because the ancient world knew what modern science has only recently confirmed. Figs are not just fruit, they are chemical engines. Figs contain a powerful proteolytic enzyme called phycin. They contain high levels of psoralen and essential oils. When you boil dried figs and apply them as a hot poultice to a localized infection, the high sugar content creates an intense osmotic pressure. It acts as a biological vacuum. It physically draws the pus, the bacteria, and the toxins out from deep within the tissue, pulling it to the surface where it can drain. The heat increases the blood flow, and the enzymes literally break down the necrotic, dead tissue. Isaiah didn't just pray. He applied a highly sophisticated, pharmacologically active, topical antibiotic. But because Isaiah was a male prophet, because he was the authorized mouthpiece of the state religion, his application of crushed fruit was recorded in the official annals of history as a miracle. It was sanctioned. It was holy. If a Canaanite woman in a tent outside the city walls had boiled those exact same figs and applied them to a dying shepherd, the religious authorities would have called her a witch. They would have dragged her out of the camp and accused her of practicing Pharmakeia. The double standard of ancient medicine is breathtaking. The men who wrote the text were terrified of the natural world, so they criminalized the women who understood it. They took the profound scientific expertise of the midwives, the herbalists, and the grandmothers, and they locked it away in the category of the forbidden. But if you read between the lines, if you look past the shining altars and the blood of the sacrifices, you can still smell the crushed hyssop. You can still see the mandrake root. You can still feel the scalding heat of the fig poultice. The survival of the human race in the brutal, violent, unforgiving landscape of antiquity was not just secured by kings drawing swords or prophets calling down fire from the sky. It was secured by the quiet, dangerous, forbidden work of women standing in the dark, grinding leaves in a mortar, refusing to let the people they loved die. They were the original doctors. They were the shadow healers. And without their forbidden medicine, the miracles of the Bible would have ended in the grave. I'm Holy Timelines.